There are 47 souls at Charon's gate, and I'm the man who keeps their world from collapsing. That isn't a metaphor. As the lead station engineer, my job is the station itself, a collection of interconnected systems that keep us warm, breathing, and sane at the bottom of the world. I spent a decade in the Navy listening to the groans of a nuclear submarine hull 1,000 feet under the Pacific. You learn a certain kind of language in a place like that. The song of a machine under pressure. You learn to hear the one note that's out of key, the one that tells you something is about to fail. Here on the ice, the song is different. It's the hum of the reactor in the powerhouse, the hiss of the air scrubbers, the rhythmic churn of the water recycler. But the job is the same. I listen for the note that's wrong. The wrong note started 3 days ago. It came from a young geophysicist named Harris, who was staring at a screen with the kind of religious terror you usually only see in old paintings. He was on the subglacial imaging radar team, the crew whose job it is to ping sound through a mile of ice to paint a picture of the bedrock below. They're looking for geological formations, mineral deposits. They aren't supposed to find shapes, especially not shapes that look manufactured. Dr. Alan Carlisle, the station chief, was there in minutes. He's a man who wears his authority like a well-tailored coat, all smooth confidence and pronouncements about history. He looked at the image on Harris's screen, a geometric anomaly deep in ice that hadn't seen the sun in over 1 million years, and saw his ticket to the history books. "Organize an excavation team," he'd said, his voice with an edge like a freshly sharpened knife. "I want that block cut out and brought to the core lab, intact." The core lab, which we all just call the ice house, is a semi-detached shed big enough to park a tank in, where they do the messy work. For the next 2 days, that's exactly what they did. Tom Wallace, our head mechanic, a loud Texan who worships at the altar of brute force, supervised the use of the Cryo-Lance 4. It's a thermal sonic drill that doesn't cut so much as vibrate the ice into submission, allowing for a clean extraction. They hauled the block out of the earth with our heaviest crane, a slab of prehistoric ice the size of a small house, its weight groaning through the steel cables. The procession from the dig site to the ice house was slow and silent, a funeral for the laws of physics. Now, it sits in the middle of the cavernous lab, and we are all staring at it. Inside the ice, clear as glass, is a scene that has broken the station's collective mind. Frozen, with his face contorted in a scream I can almost hear, is a Neanderthal. Not a fossil. A man. His muscles are coiled, his skin preserved, every detail perfect. The sheer impossibility of him being here in Antarctica is a question so huge it feels like it's sucking the air out of the room. But that's not the part that holds my attention. A few feet from him, locked in the same frozen moment, is the thing that killed him. It's a perfect toroid, a donut shape, about 7 feet across. The material looks like polished ivory, ancient and dense, but it's interwoven with dull, copper-colored metal veins that trace across its surface like a circuit board. The whole thing is perforated with thousands of holes, some as small as a pinprick, others big enough to shove your fist through. It looks engineered. It looks like a machine, a massive rolling sieve. The details are what get you. Fused into some of the larger holes, their forms crushed and partially absorbed into the ivory, are other victims. I can make out the shattered skull of a cave bear and the massive webbed antlers of an Irish elk. And there, pressed against the side, is the hand and forearm of another Neanderthal, its fingers bent into a claw, trying to pull itself away. This wasn't a fight. This was processing. We are looking at a mobile harvester, and the man's final scream was its work order. A new chapter in human history, Carlisle is saying, his voice resonating with awe. He's standing with the senior science staff, his reflection warped on the surface of the ice. The questions this poses, the answers it holds. Tom Wallace stands beside me, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He just grunts. "Well, I'll be." he says, his Texas drawl cutting through the scientific murmuring. Looks like God dropped his wedding ring. It's big, ugly, and I bet it's a real bastard to resize. I don't say anything. I'm an engineer. I don't see a miracle, and I don't see scrap. I see an unknown piece of machinery, a machine that killed things sitting in the middle of my station. Carlyle clapped his hands together once, a sharp, theatrical sound that pulled everyone from their stunned silence. All right, gentlemen, my office, senior staff, now. He gave the ice block one last proprietary glance, a landowner surveying a new continent he'd just claimed. The command center is the station's brain, a room of monitors and blinking green lights. It's the one place I try to avoid. It's Carlyle's territory. We all filed in. Me, Tom, the lead geologist, the atmospheric physicist, and Robert Miller, the deputy station chief. Miller is a man who seems to have been born ironed. A former Air Force logistics officer, he exists to translate Carlyle's grand pronouncements into checklists and work orders. He's the firewall between an idea and an action, and he never, ever deviates from procedure. Carlyle stood before the main communications console, looking less like a scientist and more like a CEO about to announce record profits. What we have in the ice house, he began, his voice full of manufactured gravity, is the single greatest discovery in human history. Let's not mince words. This changes everything. Across the room, a young man named Leo Gantz was practically vibrating. Leo's a junior biologist, a certified genius who came here on a fellowship to study extremophiles. He's brilliant and about as street smart as a newborn puppy. His eyes were wide with a convert's fire. He was already a true believer. Given its unique nature and the circumstances of its discovery, Carlyle continued, a small, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips, I am officially designating it the Carlyle artifact. Tom snorted under his breath next to me. It was just quiet enough for Carlyle to pretend he didn't hear it. The Carlyle artifact. He was planting his flag, making sure his name would be the first word in every textbook. Our priority is to study it, Carlyle said. And we can't do that while it's encased in 100 tons of ice. I want it thawed, and I want it thawed now. Mark, I need you to rig a full perimeter of thermal lamps around the block, maximum output. I want that ice melting by the hour. I felt every muscle in my jaw tighten. Chief, that's a bad idea. Carlyle's smile tightened. Oh? And why is that, Engineer Rasker? He used my title like an insult, a reminder of my station. That thing is an unknown, I said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the ice house. We have no idea what it is, how it works, or what it does. You're talking about pouring an enormous amount of energy, heat, directly into a machine we can't identify. That's not a discovery. That's an unshielded power source of unknown output. On the submarine, if we found a piece of unidentified hardware, the last thing we'd do is plug it in to see what happens. This isn't a submarine, Mark, Carlyle said, his voice dripping with condescension. This is the frontier of science. Leo, perhaps you can shed some light for our more cautious colleagues. Leo shot up, eager. The thermal energy won't damage the artifact, Chief. Its state of preservation after 1 million years suggests it's incredibly stable. The heat is just a catalyst. Thank you, Leo, Carlyle said, beaming. Mark, your caution is commendable. But we are not here to be cautious. We are here to be bold. We will proceed as planned. Sir, I'm formally recommending against it. I'll log it in the engineering report. This was where Robert Miller stepped in, smooth as a freshly oiled gear. I understand your concern, Mark, he said, his tone polite but final. Log it in the report. I will add it to the agenda for the Chief's 0800 briefing tomorrow. In the meantime, the Chief has given a direct order. We need to maintain procedural discipline. That was it. The debate was over. My objection was now a piece of paper that would be filed away, a footnote in the grand story Carlyle was already writing in his head. I was being ordered to set up the very thing I was warning them against. I looked from Carlyle's smug face to Miller's impassive one, and I felt the familiar certainty of a man who knows he's right about something that's about to go terribly wrong. "Fine," I said, turning to leave. "I'll go get the lamps." The lamps were heavy, industrial-grade units we used for outdoor maintenance during the polar night. It took me and Tom the better part of 2 hours to haul 12 of them into the icehouse and set them up in a wide circle around the frozen block. Tom did the heavy lifting, humming some old country tune while I ran the power lines, securing them to the floor with thick, yellow tape, making sure every connection was sealed against the moisture that would soon be pouring off the ice. Work is work. You do it right, even when you know it's wrong. Once they were in place, I went back to the machine shop. It's the one place on this station that smells right, a mix of grease, hot metal, and ozone that feels more honest than the recycled air of the hub. From my main diagnostic terminal, I could power up the lamps one by one, monitoring the draw on the grid. I brought the first 4 online. The station's main power source, a radioisotope thermoelectric generator we call the RTG-900, barely noticed. It's a steady workhorse. I brought the next 4 online. The load increased exactly as predicted by my calculations. The final 4 lamps turned on, and I watched the power display settle. Total draw. Stable. Then suddenly, a quick dip in the voltage, so fast that if you'd blinked, you'd have missed it. The lights in the shop didn't even have time to flicker, but the waveform on my monitor trembled like a plucked string. I spent 10 years listening to the song of a submarine hull. You learn when a new instrument joins the orchestra. Something was awake in there, and I didn't like its tune. I pulled up the feed for the life support systems on my H-pad, one of the ruggedized tablets we all carry. The system, which we call Atlas for short, is the station's lungs. It scrubs carbon dioxide, generates oxygen, and maintains ambient temperature and humidity. The system's industrial humidifiers were running at 100% capacity, screaming for more power, yet the overall station humidity was dropping. It was a physical impossibility, like pouring water into a bucket and watching the level go down. I felt a dryness at the back of my throat, the kind of thirst that a swig of water doesn't touch. My skin felt tight. I ran a hand over my worn coveralls and heard the faint crackle of static electricity. Later in the mess hall, I saw I wasn't the only one. People were drinking water like they'd just crossed a desert, complaining about chapped lips and the weird electric air. They saw it as an annoyance, a quirk of the station. But Leo Gantz wasn't annoyed. He was electric. He sat at a table with 2 other biologists speaking in a torrent of breathless excitement while sketching on a tablet. I walked over, ostensibly to get a cup of coffee. "Don't you see?" he was saying, his voice a rapturous whisper. "It's a metabolic signature, a low-level field that inhibits microbial life. It's how it was preserved, a state of suspended animation on a scale of millions of years." He looked up and saw me, his eyes shining. "Mark, you see it too, right? The dryness. It's the artifact. It's creating a preservation field." I took a slow sip of coffee. It felt like it was turning to dust on my tongue. "I see our humidifiers burning themselves out trying to fight it. I see an unknown system affecting our life support." "But that's the point," he insisted, his enthusiasm overriding any sense of caution. "We're witnessing a miracle of engineering. The problem is, as the ice melts, the melt water will contaminate the surface. Terrestrial microbes, oxidation. It'll destroy the most important data. I have to get a sample from the ivory itself, a pure sample, before it's compromised." His logic was so brilliant and so tragically flawed. He was a moth describing the beautiful colors of the flame that was about to incinerate him. "Slow down, kid," I said. "You gotta know what a thing does before you poke it." He gave me a patient, pitying smile, the kind of smile a physicist gives a janitor who questions his math. "I appreciate your concern, Mark, really. But this is the moment. One good sample and we'll have the story of a whole other creation." I just shook my head and walked away. He wasn't listening. He was hearing a different song, a siren song coming from the icehouse, and he was sailing straight for the rocks. The next 36 hours were a grinding torment of failed physics. The ice around the artifact wept, shedding meltwater that steamed on the hot floor of the icehouse and vanished into the parched air before it could form proper puddles. Inside the hub, we lived with a constant nagging thirst and the unnerving static cling of our own clothes. I kept my eye on the grid. The power fluctuations continued, small, greedy spikes that had no earthly reason for being there. Late on the second day, a new alert pinged on my terminal. Icehouse Bioscanner 3, offline. A minor equipment failure, something that happened all the time. But Bioscanner 3 was the one aimed directly at the artifact. I toggled the comms on my H-pad. "Leo, you in the icehouse?" Static. I tried again. "Leo, it's Mark. Your scanner's down. You reading me?" Nothing. I switched channels to the command center. "Robert, it's Raska. Have you got eyes on Leo Gantz?" Robert Miller's voice came back, calm as always. "Negative, Mark. He was scheduled for analysis prep in Lab 2. He missed his check-in 15 minutes ago. We assumed he was in the icehouse." "I'm heading there now," I said. "He's not responding." "Acknowledged," Miller said. "I'll meet you at the airlock." The walk down the connecting corridor felt longer than usual. The air was noticeably thinner here, drier. It stung the inside of my nose. Robert was waiting for me at the heavy pressure door. "Any response?" "None," I said. "Protocol states the lab is a two-man minimum zone since the artifact was activated," Robert stated as if reading from a manual. Leo was specifically briefed. I didn't bother answering. I just keyed the door open. The wave of air that hit us was hot and utterly arid, like opening an oven in the middle of the Sahara. The 12 thermal lamps blazed. The ice block was now maybe half its original size, a lopsided melting mountain with the dark shapes of the Neanderthal and the artifact emerging from it like bones from eroding soil. The sound was a constant hiss of melting and a powerful hum from the lamps. "Leo!" Robert called out, his voice sounding small in the big room. We fanned out. I moved around a stack of empty core containers, my boots crunching on something. It was a thin layer of fine, grey dust that hadn't been there before. I looked up at the artifact. It seemed sharper now, its ivory surface more defined as the ice receded. That's when I saw him. He'd collapsed behind a mobile diagnostic unit, just inside the 10-foot perimeter I'd marked on the floor, with warning tape. He was on his knees, slumped forward against the machine, his back to me. "Leo," I said, as I started towards him. Robert put a hand on my arm. "Mark, wait!" But I already knew. I shook him off and took the last few steps. I put a hand on Leo's shoulder. He was rigid. I gently pulled him back and he fell into my arms with a dry, rustling sound. He was drained of all weight. His face was fixed in mute, searing shock. His skin wasn't skin anymore. It was a tight, grey parchment, cracked around the mouth and eyes, drawn so taut against his skull you could see every line of bone beneath. His eyes were wide open but completely dry, sunken into their sockets like two shriveled raisins. His lips, black and split, were pulled back from his teeth in a grimace of confusion. He was a husk, a piece of human jerky. Clutched in his right hand, so tightly his knuckles were white bone under the thin skin, was a small, empty sample container. Robert stumbled back. A strangled noise caught in his throat. He looked from the body to the artifact, his procedural calm finally shattering. I'd just held the body of the kid I'd warned not 2 days ago. I lowered him gently to the floor. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. My eyes drifted to the ivory toroid, sitting impassively under the heat lamps, water trickling down its sides and vanishing into nothing. He was processed, and this was just the first step on the factory line. Robert and I carried him out. We put him on a gurney from the infirmary, and the act felt obscene. He weighed next to nothing, less than a child's winter coat stuffed with dry leaves. His limbs were stiff and brittle, and every movement was accompanied by that soft, rustling sound, like old paper. Back in the infirmary, I ran the preliminary diagnostics myself. I didn't need our one doctor, who was staring blankly at the body, to tell me what had happened. I had the data. I pulled up the logs on my H-pad, swiping through screen after screen of system readouts. "Look," I said to Robert. I pointed to the graph showing the station's humidity levels. A steady, sharp decline starting the moment the lamps went on. Then I pointed to the power grid. A corresponding series of sharp, regular spikes. It's a desiccant, a giant 7-foot desiccant. That's its passive state. It draws in moisture and it draws in the energy to process it. I looked over at Leo's mummified form. He got too close. The artifact absorbed him. He was raw material. I looked at Robert, trying to force the understanding into him through sheer will. It's not an artifact, Robert. It's a tool. The geologists figure it landed in the Panthalassan Ocean millions of years ago, so that's what I'm calling it. The Panthalassan Sampler. It's a machine designed to take things apart, and it just got flash frozen on the job. Robert looked pale, his rigid posture the only thing keeping him upright. That's not possible. The evidence says it is, I said. The body says it is. Just then, Dr. Carlyle swept into the infirmary. He looked at Leo's body on the gurney. His expression was a locked door. A terrible, tragic loss. He put a hand on my shoulder. You found him. Robert and I did, I said, shrugging off his hand. He was processed. That thing in the ice house is a factory line, and he was the first product. Carlyle ignored me, turning his attention to Robert. Robert, I need a full incident report on my desk within the hour. For now, we need to contain this situation. I'm ordering the ice house placed under full quarantine. No one in or out without my direct authorization. We can't risk a panic. Sir, Robert began, Mark's analysis suggests the artifact itself is the cause. We have a lethal variable in the middle of the station. Protocol suggests... Protocol, Carlyle interrupted, his voice suddenly hard as iron, is about to be rewritten. We are in uncharted territory. He looked back at me. Your theory is noted, Mark, but it is just that, a theory. Leo was a fine scientist who gave his life in the pursuit of knowledge. He knew the risks. The only way to properly honor his sacrifice is to ensure that his final work was not in vain. We must redouble our efforts. We must understand what we've found. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was weaponizing the kid's death, turning it into a justification to keep going. Finally, Carlyle said, his voice returning to its calm, authoritative tone as he addressed both of us. I am instituting a station-wide communications blackout, effective immediately. All uplinks will be routed through my terminal. This is to protect the integrity of the discovery until we have a full report prepared for the consortium. We cannot have partial data or panicked messages leaking out. Is that understood? Robert stared at him for a long moment. I could see the war behind his eyes, his lifetime of training, of following the chain of command, fighting against the horrifying absurdity of what Carlyle was saying. The gears in his head were grinding, trying to fit this monstrous event into a neat, procedural box where it simply didn't belong. He finally gave a short nod. Yes, sir. Carlyle looked satisfied. He had his narrative. Leo the martyr. The brave commander holding the line. It was all bullshit. It was a cover-up. He wasn't protecting the discovery. He was protecting his claim on it. He left the infirmary without a second glance at the body. Carlyle's lockdown turned the station into a pressure cooker. Fear settled into the corridors, clinging to us more than the static in the air. The 47 of us fractured into camps. The science team, loyal to Carlyle, huddled in their labs, speaking in excited whispers about unprecedented data. The rest of us, the mechanics, the drillers, the support staff, looked to me. They saw Leo's desiccated body in their minds, and looked at the chief's locked doors and saw a cage. I stayed in the machine shop. It was the only place I could think. I kept the camera feed from the ice house on one of my monitors. For 2 days, nothing changed. The artifact sat there, a 7-foot donut of death, weeping away its icy shell under the glare of the lamps. The ice had receded enough now that the toroid was mostly free, resting in a shallow cradle of what was left. The power grid was still bleeding energy in those small rhythmic sips. It was feeding, patiently. On the 3rd day after Leo's death, I noticed a change. On the camera feed, the dull copper veins interwoven through the ivory began to emit a soft glow. It wasn't bright, just a faint, sullen red, like the embers of a dying fire. I watched for an hour as the glow intensified, crawling along the metallic pathways, a slow-motion circuit boot-up. The energy spikes on my grid monitor grew stronger. It was taking bigger gulps now. I called Robert Miller. "Get Carlisle," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The artifact is activating. The thermoelectric lattice is online." "The quarantine is absolute, Mark." Robert's tired voice came back over the comm. "The chief's orders stand." "Does he have a protocol for when it stands up and walks out of there?" I snapped. "Because that's what's coming next." He didn't have an answer. The first sound was a low hum that vibrated up through the station's steel deck plates. It was a new note in the station's song, deep and out of key. The hum grew steadily for 10 seconds, a building pressure that made the air feel heavy. And then came the thump. A single, heavy, resonant impact that shook the entire station. A wrench rattled off my workbench. In the hub, I heard a distant crash of breaking glass and a swell of panicked shouts. It was the sound of 1,000 tons of granite being dropped from a great height. It was the sound of immense weight shifting. On the camera feed, the artifact had moved. It had shifted in its icy cradle, rolling maybe 6 inches, before settling back into the ice with that bone-jarring impact. Its internal systems were online. It was awake. The door to the machine shop slammed open and Tom Wallace stood there, his face flushed with rage. The fear I saw in the other crewman was nowhere in his eyes. He was long past fear. "That's it," he growled, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the room almost as much as the thump had. He stalked towards me, jabbing a thick, grease-stained finger at the monitor showing the shifted artifact. "You see that? You see, it's moving. And he," Tom spat the word like poison, meaning Carlisle, "has us locked in here with it." "I know, Tom." "Knowing isn't enough anymore, Mark," he said, his eyes blazing. He looked around my shop, at the grinders, the welders, the plasma cutters mounted on the wall. His gaze settled on the K5 plasma cutter, a heavy-duty industrial tool that could carve through 6 inches of solid steel like it was warm butter. "I ain't saying you're wrong. You're the smartest guy on this damn ice cube, but that thing is a machine, and there ain't a single machine ever been built that I can't take apart, one way or another." He turned away from me and walked toward the tool rack. "Thinking is over," he declared to the other mechanics who had gathered behind him, drawn by the commotion. "Time for recess. Let's go introduce this thing to a little Texas hospitality." I tried to get in his way. "Tom, don't! This is suicide!" I grabbed his arm, the muscle beneath his greasy coveralls hard as packed earth. "You saw what it did to Leo without even moving. You can't fight it like this." He stopped and looked at me, and for a second the rage in his eyes softened. "And what's your plan, Mark? More reports? Wait for Carlisle to sacrifice another one of us for his data? No. Sometimes a man's got to do something. Thinking only gets you so far." He shrugged my hand off gently. He wasn't angry with me. He just thought I was wrong. He and the 3 mechanics with him didn't bother with the door controls. Tom just fired up a portable cutting torch and sliced through the magnetic lock mechanism on the icehouse door with a shower of sparks. The heavy door hissed open on its pneumatic arms. Mutiny, open and loud. I followed them in, keeping my distance, I wasn't going to be part of it, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let them die alone. The ice house was a furnace. The hum from the artifact was louder in here. Tom's team fanned out, their faces caught between terror and determination. Tom, though, he was all business. He hefted the K5 plasma cutter, its power pack slung over his shoulder, and planted his feet like he was bracing for a hurricane. "All right, boys," he yelled over the hum of the lamps. "The doctors had their fun. Time for recess." He hit the ignition switch. The cutter roared to life, a sound like a jet engine crammed into a shoebox. A pilot light flickered, then erupted into a blinding violet-white jet of plasma, nearly a foot long. The air shrieked around it. 20,000 degrees of focused thermal energy. A miniature sun on a stick. He strode forward toward the artifact. His last words, full of that unshakable West Texas confidence, echoed in the hot, dry air. "Okay, you ivory son of a bitch, let's dance." He laid the tip of that violet-white star against the artifact's curved surface. The plasma jet, which could turn 6 inches of reinforced steel into molten slag in seconds, splashed against the ivory like water from a hose. It didn't even leave a scorch mark. The superheated particles hissed and skittered across the smooth surface, their terrifying energy dissipating into nothing. Tom stared, his confidence vaporizing in the face of the impossible. He pushed harder, the cutter's engine screaming as he forced it against the indifferent machine. And then the artifact responded. One of the larger holes on its surface, one no bigger than a quarter, darkened. From it issued a sound, a thin, piercing, high-frequency whine that drilled directly into my skull. The K5 plasma cutter in Tom's hands began to shake violently. The whine from the artifact was a perfect, resonant match for the cutter's own operating frequency. The whine intensified, and the cutter shrieked. Sparks flew from its housing. Tom tried to let go, but his hands were frozen in a death grip, his whole body convulsing. The cutter's power pack overloaded. The explosion was brutally efficient. A shaped charge of force that ripped outward from Tom's position, throwing his men against the walls like rag dolls. Tom himself simply ceased to be. One moment he was there, a solid wall of a man, and the next he was gone, vaporized in the catastrophic failure of his own weapon. The whine stopped. The roar of the cutter was replaced by a ringing silence. The air was thick with the smell of cooked meat. I stood there, my ears screaming, staring at the aftermath, at the crumpled forms of the other mechanics, at the spot where Tom had been standing, now just a blackened scorch mark on the floor, and at the artifact. It sat, silent and unmoved, in the center of the carnage. The copper veins that traced its surface now flashed with a brighter, healthier glow. It was completely unharmed. It had analyzed our best weapon and turned it into a bomb. The ringing in my ears eventually subsided, replaced by the rising panic. Alarms blared through the station that meant a critical life support failure. Shouts echoed over the open comm channels, a chaos of terror and disbelief. I managed to drag one of Tom's men, a kid named Peterson, back into the main corridor. His leg was broken, twisted, but he was alive. The other 2 were gone. Back in the machine shop, I slammed the emergency release for the corridor's blast door. It groaned shut, a thick slab of steel sealing us off from the icehouse. I watched it on my monitors. The sampler, now glowing with a vibrant, healthy pulse, rolled out of the icehouse through the gash Tom had cut, its gravity drive pulling it forward in a liquid roll that was utterly silent. It was a 7-foot-wide wave of indifferent destruction. It turned left, heading for the hub. "It's heading for the hub," I said into my H-pad, trying to cut through the panicked comm chatter. "Everyone get out of the main ring. Seal your quarters." On my screen I saw a map of the station, with 42 blue dots representing the crew's biometric signals. The sampler was a slow-moving anomaly, a void of data. It followed the largest cluster of dots. Then Carlyle's voice cut through the alarms, broadcast over the station-wide PA system. It was perfectly calm. All personnel maintain positions. Do not panic. We are observing a new stage of active behavior. We need to collect data. Data? I heard someone say over the comm. It killed Tom. It's coming for us. I watched a camera feed showing the main connecting corridor to the hub. A half-dozen people were scrambling down it. One of them, a geologist named Davis, stumbled and fell behind. The sampler glided into view at the far end of the hall, its silent roll more terrifying than any charge. On my system schematic, a red line appeared across the corridor on the other side of Davis. The maglock on the far blast door had engaged. He was trapped. "Who the hell locked that door?" I shouted into the comm. I toggled to the command center's camera feed. I saw Dr. Carlyle standing at the station's main lockdown control panel, his hand still on the console. Robert Miller stood beside him, his eyes wide with horror. "Remarkable," Carlyle murmured, his eyes fixed on the monitor showing the corridor. He was speaking to Robert, but his voice was picked up by the room's open mic. "The localized gravity well. It's pulling him in. Robert, are you recording this? This data is invaluable." On the other screen, Davis clawed at the sealed door, his screams echoing, tinny and distant. The sampler rolled on, unhurried. It didn't need to chase him. The space around it did the work, tugging him backward as if he were caught in an invisible tide. His feet slid against the floor. He was pulled off balance, falling. The last thing the camera saw was the perforated ivory surface rolling over him. A quiet, methodical erasure. His blue dot on my schematic blinked once, then went dark. In the command center feed, Robert Miller took a step back from Carlyle, a look of utter revulsion on his face. He shook his head slowly, a single spastic gesture of denial. He had seen the hand of God, and it was holding a goddamn clipboard. An hour later, the station was mostly silent. The alarms had been deactivated. 18 blue dots had gone dark on my screen. The survivors were barricaded in their rooms or in small, terrified groups. The sampler was now a roaming patrol, and the door to my machine shop opened. Robert Miller stood there. He wasn't the ironed man from the Air Force anymore. He looked like a building that had collapsed in on itself. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he held his H-pad in a trembling hand, its screen glowing. He looked at me, his face a wreck of shattered belief, and his voice was a raw whisper. "He killed him, Mark. Davis. He locked the door. I saw him do it." He held up the H-pad. A recording of Carlyle's voice, calm and clinical, played into the quiet of the shop. Robert looked up from the screen, his eyes meeting mine. The last cog in his well-oiled machine of procedure and protocol had finally, irrevocably broken. I took his H-pad and shut it off. I walked over to my main workbench, my sanctuary of order, and picked up a clean rag, wiping grease that wasn't there from my hands. My mind was running through variables, discarding failed strategies. "Tom tried force," I said. "That didn't work. The sampler is indestructible. Davis tried to run. That didn't work. It's faster, or at least its influence is. The rest of them tried to hide. 18 blue dots gone dark says that doesn't work either. We can't kill it, we can't outrun it, and we can't hide from it." I tossed the rag onto the bench. "And we have Carlyle. He won't let us fight it. He'll feed every last one of us to that thing if it means he gets another page of notes." I turned to face Robert, whose eyes were still hollowed out with shock. "That leaves one option. Containment. That thing, the Panthalassan sampler. It cannot leave this continent, ever." Robert looked at me confused. "What are you talking about? Leave. We're trapped here." "Now we are," I said. "But what happens in 6 weeks when the winter breaks and the transport plane arrives? What do they find? A silent station? A homicidal machine that's had over a month to... what? Recharge. Replicate. And a station chief who will greet them with a smile and a Nobel Prize-winning discovery." I shook my head. "No. This ends here. All of it." I walked over to a heavy, sealed panel on the far wall of the shop, a section that accessed the conduit leading directly to the powerhouse. Every secure facility like this has a final failsafe. On the subs, we called it the scuttle protocol. Here, it's the thermite purge system. Robert's eyes widened slightly as the implication hit him. It's the station's self-destruct, I explained, running a hand over the steel panel. A network of thermite charges wired directly to the RTG's primary housing. When it's triggered, the sequence is irreversible. The thermite melts through the reactor's shielding. 10 minutes later, the core goes critical. It will melt this entire station and everything for a half-mile around it into a radioactive, glass-lined crater 100 feet deep. It's designed for exactly this kind of scenario, a biological or technological contagion that cannot be allowed to reach the outside world. I looked at Robert, letting the full weight of it sink in. It's our only move left. We trigger the purge. He stared at me, his mind built for logistics and schedules, grappling with the concept of total annihilation as a viable strategy. "My God," he whispered. "And how do we do that?" This was the final, ugly variable. The catch that turned our only option from a strategy into a suicide mission. "It's a two-man rule," I said. "To prevent some lunatic from getting ideas, the activation requires two separate, sequential authorization codes. There are only 2 copies of those codes on the entire station. One belongs to the station chief." I tapped my chest. "And the other belongs to the lead engineer." We both understood. Our only way out was to get to the powerhouse, and standing between us and salvation was Dr. Alan Carlyle, who held the other key to the apocalypse. "Okay," I said, pulling a heavy-duty pry bar from the slot on the wall. "The most direct route to the powerhouse is through the sub-level service corridors. It's tight, dark, and half the systems down there are probably fried, but it's our best shot." Robert nodded. He brought up the station schematics on his H-pad, his military training kicking in, transforming raw fear into logistical planning. "Junction 7B is a straight shot to the main access ladder," he said, tracing a route with his finger. "If we can get there. If," I finished for him. The sampler's last known position was in the hub's central ring. It's between us and where we need to go. We didn't waste any more time. I cracked the seal on the service corridor access panel, and we descended into the station's guts. We moved fast, our boots echoing on the steel grates. We passed a section where the air suddenly went bone dry. A fine layer of grey dust coated the floor, glittering in our lights. "It's been here," Robert whispered. "Recently," I said, picking up the pace. We came to a 4-way junction. The corridor ahead was partially collapsed, a tangle of ventilation ducts and severed power conduits. The schematics on Robert's tablet showed it was the only way forward. As we got closer, a tool cart propped against the far wall began to rattle. A loose bolt on the floor slid an inch toward us, then another. The gravity well. It was close. "Back!" I hissed, grabbing Robert's arm and pulling him behind the relative cover of a large junction box. The sampler glided into the intersection from the left. It didn't seem to notice us. It paused, as if it were listening. It was directly between us and the collapsed tunnel we needed to get through. It began to roll forward, its path taking it directly past our hiding spot. We were pinned. Robert's eyes darted around, calculating. He saw it before I did. A reinforced conduit running along the wall, marked with a yellow stripe and the stenciled words, "Backup Gen Diesel Feed." He looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time since this whole nightmare began. He shoved his H-pad into my hands. "The route is clear past that junction," he whispered. "Get to the powerhouse." Before I could protest, he moved. He ran parallel to the sampler, dashing toward the fuel line conduit. He pulled the pry bar, and the sudden frantic movement drew the sampler's attention. It stopped its forward roll and turned, its perforated face fixing on this new, more active target. Robert jammed the pry bar into the conduit's access panel and heaved, his body straining. The panel screeched open. The sampler began to roll toward him. He was buying me time. He was creating a diversion. With a final grunt, he broke the line. A high-pressure spray of diesel fuel shot across the corridor. The sampler didn't slow. Robert looked over at a thick power cable, severed and sparking from the earlier damage to the corridor. He looked back at me. The perfect subordinate, who had followed the wrong orders into hell, was about to give his first and last true command. "Rasker, that is a direct order. Go!" I scrambled through the wreckage. Robert didn't wait. He grabbed the sparking cable with his bare hand, his body convulsing for a split second, and jammed it into the stream of diesel fuel. The world turned into white fire and roaring thunder. The explosion threw me forward, slamming me against a bulkhead. My ears were just a wall of white noise. I pushed myself up, scrambling on hands and knees. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had my orders. The path to the powerhouse was clear, paid for in fire and redemption, and I ran. The blast door to the powerhouse hung open, bent and twisted on its hinges. I stumbled through it into the one place on this station that was truly mine. The air was thick with the smell of burnt fuel from the explosion. But underneath it all was the familiar hum of the RTG-900, my reactor. It was the only song on the station that still sounded right. The chamber was bathed in the ethereal blue glow of Cherenkov radiation from the reactor's cooling tank, a light that had always felt calming. Tonight, it just made the shadows deeper. Dr. Alan Carlyle stood in front of the emergency override panel, the one that housed the purge activation system. His expensive coat was torn and blackened, his face was smeared with soot, and his eyes held a feverish, ecstatic light. He had a crowbar in his hands, and he was jamming it into the seams of the reinforced steel panel, trying to pry it open to destroy the delicate circuitry within. He saw me, and a snarl twisted his lips. "Rasker, the Vandal has arrived to finish his work." My ears were still ringing. My head was a mess of grief and adrenaline, a numb weight where Robert used to be. I didn't have the energy for a debate. I held up my data key, the first half of the self-destruct sequence. "It's over, Carlyle. Give me the code." He laughed, a ragged, unhinged sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Over? Don't you understand anything? This is the beginning, a new genesis. That organism is the answer to every question we have ever asked." A loose wrench on a nearby console slid an inch across the metal surface. The gravity well. It was coming. "It's a machine that killed 23 of our people," I said. "And you fed it at least one of them. Now give me the goddamn key." "You see a monster. I see a miracle of engineering," he said, his voice cracking. He gestured wildly with the crowbar. "You see death. I see the price of enlightenment. History will not remember the fallen, Mark. It will remember the man who had the vision to see this through to the end. That man is me. You will not erase me." He lunged back at the panel, ramming the crowbar into it. That was it. No more talk. I launched myself at him. It was a clumsy, desperate scramble. He swung the crowbar, and I batted it aside, the impact jarring my arm to the shoulder. I tackled him, and we slammed into a rack of diagnostic equipment, sending tools clattering to the floor. He was stronger than he looked, fueled by a fanatic's energy. His fingers clawed at my face while I fumbled for the data key. It was on a chain around his neck. I saw it glinting against his chest. The entire deck plate beneath us began to vibrate. Metal dust swirled up from the floor, dancing in the blue light. The sampler was right outside. Carlyle kneed me in the ribs, and I gasped. The wind knocked out of me. He scrambled to his feet, raising the crowbar for another blow. I kicked out from the floor, my heavy boot connecting with his knee. There was a wet, cracking sound, and he went down with a cry of pure agony. I was on him in an instant, my hands going for the chain around his neck. He fought back, his hands like claws, but his strength was gone. I got my fingers around the chain, pulled, and it bit into his skin. He choked. I yanked harder. The metal snapped, and the data key was in my hand. I stumbled back, clutching both keys. Carlyle lay on the floor, gripping his shattered knee, hatred and agony twisting his features. The sound of the sampler stopped. The vibrations ceased. A new, terrifying silence fell over the powerhouse, and through the mangled doorway it rolled into view. Its copper veins flashed with a slow, steady, triumphant light. It had come home to the greatest source of energy in the entire station. It had come for the reactor. The sampler rolled into the room. It paid no attention to me. It ignored the crumpled form of Carlyle on the floor. Its prime directive had shifted. It was no longer harvesting biomass. It was harvesting energy. It glided past us, its trajectory aimed directly at the shimmering blue heart of the powerhouse, the reactor tank. Carlyle, propped up on one elbow, watched it go. The madness in his eyes softened into a look of religious awe. "It understands," he breathed, a bloody froth on his lips. "It sees divinity." He began to drag himself across the floor, his broken leg twisting uselessly behind him. He was crawling towards it, trying to be part of its final, glorious ascension. I stumbled to the override panel, the two keys clutched in my fist. My hands were shaking from a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I fumbled with the panel's lock, my fingers slick with my own blood. It snapped open. 2 keyholes, 2 sequential turns, the final switch covered by a simple, red plastic flap. Behind me, Carlyle saw what I was doing. The awe in his face curdled back into pure animal rage. "No!" he shrieked, his voice thin and reedy. "You can't, Rasker, you insignificant mechanic. You are erasing history. You are erasing me." I slammed the first key into its slot and twisted. A green light blinked on. The sampler was now just feet from Carlyle, its gravity well tugging at his body, pulling him gently across the floor toward its perforated surface. I shoved the second key into the slot, twisted it home. A second green light joined the first. The system was armed. All that was left was the final command. The sampler rolled over Carlyle's good leg. He screamed, a high, thin sound of agony that was abruptly cut off as the hygroscopic ivory touched his skin. The desiccating effect was instantaneous and violent. He withered, his body seeming to shrink and fold in on itself, his scream turning into a dry, rattling hiss. A fine grey dust began to puff from his coveralls. He had wanted his name on the discovery. He had become its final footnote. I looked away from the procedural horror of his unmaking. I flipped up the red plastic cover. Beneath it was a single, black button. I thought of Robert, of Tom, of Leo, of the 23 souls this thing had erased. I thought of the song of a submarine hull and the silence I'd come here to find, and I pressed the button. Immediately, the station screamed. A klaxon alarm blared, deafening in the enclosed space. Red lights strobed across the room, casting everything in a bloody, rhythmic pulse. A calm voice cut through the chaos, speaking from every speaker in the powerhouse. "Thermite purge system activated. Reactor scuttle sequence initiated. Detonation in 10 minutes." The sampler stopped. It seemed to sense the change, the monumental surge of power being rerouted to the thermite charges. It turned from the reactor tank and began to roll towards me, towards the control panel, the source of this new ultimate threat. I didn't run. There was nowhere to go. My ribs were fire, my head was swimming, and my leg throbbed where Carlyle had kicked me. I leaned back against the console, my legs giving out, and slid to the floor. 9 minutes to detonation. The sampler rolled closer, its copper veins glowing with intense, angry light. It was coming to take me apart. But it was too late. The job was done. I was an engineer. I had spent my life listening for the wrong note. And now, I was listening to the last song the station would ever sing. I closed my eyes as the 7-foot wheel of death filled my vision. The silence I came here for was finally coming. The official report, classified for 50 years by the Antarctic Research Consortium, cited catastrophic reactor failure. A cascade of unforeseen environmental stresses, it concluded, led to a critical malfunction in the RTG 900's primary housing. The loss of all 47 personnel at Charon's Gate on August 14, 2052, was ruled a tragic but unavoidable industrial accident. The names were etched onto a memorial plaque at McMurdo Station, listed alphabetically. Dr. Alan Carlyle, as station chief, was at the top. Mark Rasker, lead engineer, was near the bottom. For decades, the site itself was a navigational hazard, a no-fly zone designated simply as Anomaly 7. Satellites that passed over it registered extreme levels of radiation. When the first geological survey drone was finally sent to map the crater in the early 22nd century, its report was clinical. It described a perfect concave bowl nearly a mile in diameter. The ground was not ice or rock, but a smooth, unbroken sheet of black, obsidian-like glass, fused by heat so intense it had vaporized the bedrock beneath it. The place is sterile to the molecule. Nothing lives there. The winds that howl across the polar plateau are the only things that ever move on its glassy surface. On a clear day, the sun glints off the crater's dark curve, a blind and empty eye staring up at the vast, uncaring sky. Later, cartographers would unofficially name it the Rasker crater, a placeholder name taken from the old station manifests, though no one remembered why that specific name was chosen over any of the others. Far away in a galaxy that has long since collapsed into darkness, an automated archival hub continues its final, lingering task. For over 100 millennia, its routine queries to Unit 734 had received the same automated reply, a low-power signal from the third planet of the Sol system. Status: dormant, awaiting optimal conditions. It was a placeholder in the Grand Archive, a note on a machine trapped but not destroyed. But on this cycle, the query returns only silence. The archival hub follows its protocol for a lost asset. It cross-references the unit's last known coordinates with public galactic energy archives, searching for anomalies. It finds one, a minor, localized thermal nuclear event dated to the early 21st century, Sol 3 Standard Time. A flicker of energy, barely significant on a cosmic scale, but precisely where Unit 734 should be. The system updates the long-dormant file. Asset: Unit 734, status, terminated, last known coordinates, Sol 3, cause, catastrophic local energy event, mission incomplete, resolution, log and archive, no further action required. The file is closed. The light from the dead star continues its journey into an empty, silent universe. The system, its final task complete, goes dark.